Hi, and welcome to my free mini workshop, How to Talk to Your Kids About Consent. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Nadine Thornhill, and I am a sexuality educator. And my focus is child and adolescent sexuality, but I work primarily with families and teachers to give them the tools that they need to have conversations with their children and their teens about sex, sexuality, and related issues. So this is my very first time doing a workshop online. Um, so I'm still kind of trying to figure out the format, and just so you know, I've got notes on my desktop, which is just in front of my laptop. So every once in a while you may see me doing this eye move or this eye move, and that's just because I'm consulting my notes. So this is a free mini workshop, and so it's going to be a little more general than my full-scale 2-3 hour workshops, but hopefully you'll still get some really great tips from this workshop and some information to maybe help you get started if you're looking to have conversations with your kids about consent. So consent is a really hot button issue right now, and I'm actually really pleased about that. Unfortunately, the reason that a lot of people are talking about it is because there have been some high-profile cases in the media, Jian Ghomeshi and Bill Cosby, and a lot of really disturbing allegations of sexual assault, of serial sexual assault, which is upsetting. It's also a hot topic because in Ontario, we're looking at having a revised sex education curriculum in schools. And one of the things that our premier wants to do is to start teaching kids about consent early on, starting from, I believe, grade 1, which I think is fantastic. But some people aren't sure how this is going to work or what the value is in that. And so I want to talk a little bit about that and why I think it's so important to talk to kids about consent. So what we're going to cover tonight is why most of you already know how to do this, and you've probably been teaching your kids about consent all along without really realizing this. We're going to talk about some ideas, some cultural ideas and norms that tend to mess up consent and get in the way of sexual consent specifically. We're going to talk about modeling and why that's a great way to teach kids. I'm going to give you a few tips about starting a conversation if you're not sure how to do that. And then we're going to talk about how to have that conversation with younger kids as opposed to having the conversation with older kids, because they are a little bit different. And then at the end, I'm going to answer any questions that you have. And if you are joining me on Google, up at the top of your window, I believe it's on the right side, there is a little grouping of squares. I believe it's 9 squares. If you click on that, you'll see a little tag called Q&A. And so what you can do is you can click on the Q&A, and then if you have any questions, just type them out and they will pop up in this little window I have off to the right of my screen, and I'll be able to see them, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have at the end. If you don't have a Google Plus account, but you're still watching this workshop, you can also contact me through my Facebook, or you can contact me through my website, or you can contact me via email if you have any questions. And I'm going to have all those links for you at the end of the workshop. Okay, so let's get started. I have some slides, and I'm going to try and share them with you. Let's see. Oh, no, that's not anything. Okay. Sorry, slides are not working, but we can still power through this. So, why you already know how to talk to kids about consent. We talk to kids about consent, and we talk to them about it a lot when we teach them how to respect other people's properties, and when we teach them how to behave when they go to somebody else's home. So, when we go to somebody else's house, what are some of the things that we do? Well, before we go in, we ring a doorbell or we knock, and we wait for them to respond and then to invite us in. And then once we go inside somebody's house, we tend to be very respectful of the homeowner's boundaries. So, for example, if we're going to somebody's house for the first time, or it's not somewhere that we go a lot, we're going to ask, can I use your bathroom? Or could I trouble you for a glass of water? We don't walk into rooms unless we've been told that, it's fine if you, come into my bedroom, or, we wait for them to invite us to, hey, come into the family room and sit down and watch some TV with me, or come into the dining room and enjoy a meal with me. But we are always letting the homeowner decide where it's okay for us to be and where it's not okay for us to be. Another thing that can happen is that those boundaries may change over time, your boundaries with the homeowner, depending on your relationship and depending on how well you know each other. And we accept that we're going to have our access is going to be different depending on what our relationship is with that person and what they think is okay. So, for example, my neighbor who I'm just met may say, you know what, come in, sit down, have a cup of tea. We may stay in, just one room, talk a little bit, get to know each other, and then I will probably go home, as opposed to when I go to, say, my mother's house, where I actually have a key to the home, and I'm really welcome to come over there almost any time. But even in my mother's house, I always understand that she never forfeits the right to decide if I'm allowed to be there, how long I'm allowed to be there, and when I have to leave. And I accept the fact that if she wants me to leave, or she doesn't want me to come over for some reason, then I don't really have any right to push her on that. And if I did, then I would be in the wrong. And so this is the model of consent that I would love to see people use around sexuality. And I think it's the model of consent that we need to use around sexuality. So I often describe myself as being a sex positive educator. And so as a sex positive educator, I really believe that people can have whatever kind of sex makes them happy, and whatever kind of sex they want to have, under 3 conditions. The first is that the sex has to be consensual. The second is that ideally it should be pleasurable. And the third is that it should be part of their well-being. And those are 3 principles that I got from Charlie Glickman, who is like sex educator extraordinaire. But I think those are really good guidelines for what positive sexuality should look like. And I think it's really important and very valuable to teach our kids about positive sexuality. So moving on, let's talk about some really common ideas in our society that kind of make consent difficult or mess up the idea of consent. So the first one is gender essentialism. And gender essentialism is basically the fancy term that says, is the fancy term to describe those ideas we have about how, boys may behave one way, or girls may behave one way, or women are one way and men are another way. And this idea that, genders exist as a monolith, and everyone or most people who are part of that gender will behave in a certain way. So, for example, when it comes to sex, we have these ideas that, women are more emotionally driven, and what they're really looking for is security, or they have sex as an expression of emotion, whereas men are very physically driven, and they always want sex, and everything else that happens that isn't sex is just a lead up to sex, or is a means towards sex. And I find that really problematic, because what that sort of says is that, well, if women are really about the emotions and they're never really physically driven and they never truly want to have actual sex, then the idea there is that on some level, if you want to have sex with a woman, you always have to coerce or manipulate or convince her or give her something in exchange for the sex, because she never really wants it. And that's a problem, because when we're talking about consensual sex, we're talking about people doing things that they want to do. Another idea, and that's really popular in a society that I find problematic, is the baseball metaphor. So, getting to first base, getting to second base, having intercourse is sliding home. I think this describes sex in a very goal-oriented way. I think it also describes sex as a competition. And basically, you're talking about your sexual partner as your competitor rather than somebody who's on your team. And so instead of it being an experience that where you collaborate and you negotiate and you craft the experience together, it's more like you're adversaries and you're kind of fighting each other. So it's, oh, well, you know, the person who wants the sex is trying to steal home. It's basically describing sex as, if you get to have intercourse with someone, you're taking something away from them, or you're scoring points. One of you wins, one of you loses. I don't like that. Another idea is, or another thing that happens in our culture is slut shaming and what I call stud baiting. So slut shaming is something that often happens to women, but not exclusively to women. And it's this idea that you have somehow devalued yourself as a person if you have too much sex. And too much is this arbitrary amount of sex that will be different from person to person. And so instead of talking about, you know, are you enjoying the sex you're having? Are you doing what you want to be doing? We're saying, well, you know, there is such a thing as too much sex. And if you're enjoying it too much, if you're doing it too much, you're a bad person. And that, again, is highly problematic because it discourages girls and women from owning their sexuality and being honest about their sexuality and saying, you know, when they want to have sex, saying, you know what, I want to have sex with you. And I'm just going to tell you that. Stud baiting is my term to describe what happens with guys, where the idea is that if you are a guy, you should want sex. You should be trying to get as much sex as possible. If you're not actively trying to get sex, there's something wrong with you. If you don't want to have sex, that's bizarre. Because again, it sets up sex as this sort of competitive sport. And so that makes it really difficult, I think, for men to say, no, I would prefer not to have sex. And it also puts a lot of pressure on men to try and pursue sex rather than thinking about things like, do I want to have sex? Does my partner want to have sex? Are we enjoying this sex? What is going on? Something else that I hear a lot of is that it's really difficult to talk about sex and negotiate sex. And oh my gosh, what's going to happen if I have to ask at every stage, you know, do you like this? Is this okay? Is this okay? Can I touch you here? Can I touch you there? And that all this talking is going to ruin the sex. And that sex is a thing where people just come together, you know, like magnets, and there's electricity, and then they just kind of bump up against each other and start rolling around and writhing and sweating, and they never have to talk and they never have to communicate, and nobody ever has to say like, whoa, hang on here, that's not working for me, or hey, you know what, that feels really good, but I'd love it if you could try such and such, or you know what, I'm just not going to get it up tonight, let's do something else. That is problematic. Talking about sex doesn't have to ruin the mood. It can be a very normal and sexy part of being with a partner, but we have to get used to doing it, and we have to normalize that. So talk about sex, talk about it when you're not having it, and talk about it when you are having it. And related to that is the idea that good sex just happens. That if you have sexual chemistry, that you don't have to ever communicate or negotiate what's going to happen sexually. And that's simply not true. Good sex doesn't just happen. For most people, you got to talk about it. You have to communicate somehow and get on the same page. That can take a little time. It can be awkward, but that's just sex in real life as opposed to sex in porn or the movies or on TV. All right, so let's move on and talk about modeling. So if you're an adult and you are trying to teach your child or adolescent about this stuff, modeling is fantastic. And basically that is teaching kids or anyone how to do something by letting them see or experience you doing that thing. And modeling is a really effective way to guide children's behavior because they do listen to what we say to them, but they are much more attuned to what we're doing, and they're much more likely to emulate our behavior. And so in terms of modeling consent, that can take on all sorts of things. So for example, if you have, you can do this with younger or older children. if you want to share their photo on social media, so I'm on Instagram a lot, I'm on Facebook a lot, I post a lot of pictures. What I do if I'm going to post a picture of my son is that I always ask before I post his picture, and I let him know exactly where I'm posting it, and then I show him the picture so he knows he's there. Now, this is something I only thought of doing in the last maybe 1 or 2 years. And prior to that, I had posted a lot of pictures of him as a baby and as a toddler, and I hadn't had his consent to do that. It didn't occur to me to do it at the time. So what I've done subsequently is that I've shown him my Facebook, and so he's actually seen every single picture of him that is on my Facebook. There are a couple of he's asked me to take off, and so I have. But from now on, whenever I want to post his picture, I ask him, because I want him to get used to the idea that if you're going to post a picture of someone who isn't you, that you need to ask. And it doesn't have to be a big deal, but ask first. This is one for little kids. If you're playing with your child, you know, running around or playing toys with them or anything, you can stop every once in a while and ask them, "Hey, are you having fun?" And so this has nothing to do with sex when they're little. This is just, again, getting them used to the idea of checking in, and the idea that when you're doing something with your partner that is supposed to, you know, be a good time, that it's normal and okay and nice to, you know, check and say like, "Hey, is this okay for you? Are you having a good time?" Something else you can do for modeling is if you have a sexual partner. So for example, I have my husband, we live in the same house, we're sexual partners. Feel free to engage romantically in front of your kids. And so again, I'm not talking about, you know, really explicit, you know, having sex in front of your kids, but feel free to flirt, feel free to cuddle, feel free to say suggestive things where, you know, maybe you know what you're talking about, but if your kids are little, they don't know what you're talking about, but they can hear the tone. You can feel free to touch each other in sort of playful, flirtatious ways. This is something that my partner and I do, and one of the reasons that I'm glad that my son sees this is that my partner will touch me in ways that 9 times out of 10 I love, but every once in a while, you know, I'm not in the mood for it and I don't like it. And, you know, I may pull away, or I may say like, "Oh, not now," or move his hand off. And I want my son to see that too, because I want him to understand that just because somebody likes something most of the time, it doesn't mean that they're going to like it all of the time. And that if you're having a moment where you don't like it, it's okay to say no to that. And if you're the person who's, you know, being told no, that you can just accept that and, you know, walk away, and it doesn't have to be a big deal. You can also offer your kids opportunities to hug, to cuddle, to kiss, and to experience physical affection. And again, you know, this is not sexual, but this is just giving them the opportunity to really experience what positive physical interaction feels like. It also gives them an opportunity to say yes or no to those hugs or those cuddles or those holding hands. Physical affection in general is a very positive thing, but like anyone else, kids have moments where they're like, "Yeah, I don't really want to kiss you right now," or "I don't really want to hug you right now." So letting them say that and respecting that, but also inviting them and letting them see that when you do want physical affection, it's okay to ask for it. And it's okay to say like, "Hey, I'd love to give you a hug right now. Is that okay?" Or, you know, "Why don't we, you know, let's hold hands." And it doesn't even have to be verbal. It can just be nonverbal. You know, you can reach out a hand for your child. You can hold your arms open and let them run into your arms. And in that way, they're really starting to pick up on both the verbal and nonverbal cues of, "Yes, this is okay." I don't reach into my arms like, "Yay, this is okay." Or like, "No, no, not right now." And finally, you can honor your kids' refusals to hug and kiss the people they don't want to. And I know a lot of people do this already with their kids and relatives. So that if, you know, a grandparent or an aunt or uncle, a cousin, a close family friend comes over, rather than doing the whole like, "You kiss your grandmother because it's rude not to," I'm seeing a lot of parents nowadays who are saying, "You know what? You don't have to kiss. anyone if you don't want to, and actually speaking up on their children's behalf to relatives who might otherwise feel hurt or not understand, why their parents aren't insisting that their little kids, dole out the hugs and kisses, which is really, really encouraging. And I think that's a great example of modeling consent. Okay, so conversation starters. Let's talk about those. Something I often recommend if you are looking to start a conversation around sexuality with your kid is to start the conversation by asking your child an open-ended question. And I'm going to talk in a little while about what some of those open-ended questions can be specifically. But I like this method for starting conversations for a couple of reasons. First of all, if you're basically asking your kid a sort of, well, what do you think about this situation? Or what would you do? Or what are your thoughts on this particular idea? It gives them a chance to speak first, and it shows them that you value their ideas and that they're entering into a dialogue with you rather than it being you lecturing at them. The other reason I like starting off conversations with a question is that it gives you as the adult an opportunity to sort of gauge their understanding of the topic. You get a sense of sort of where they're at in their knowledge. It gives you maybe a sense of sort of where they're at even with their vocabulary and what words you should be using. And that gives you an opportunity to tailor the conversation to their specific needs. The third reason that I like starting conversations with questions, and I use this all the time, is because it lets me sort of beat them to the punch. So if I'm sort of, every once in a while, a topic will come up or I'll hear it being discussed on the news, and I know my son's sort of aware of it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, is he going to ask me? Is he going to ask me what I'm going to say? What am I going to say? So rather than him surprising me and asking me a question when I'm not prepared, then I get to sort of beat him to the punch. I ask him the question. And then when he's talking and formulating his little answer, I can be in my head being like, okay, what am I going to say? What am I going to say? Okay, he's saying that, so I can say this. So it gives me just a clearer jumping off point when we're having those sorts of talks. So since we're talking about those questions that you can ask, let's get into some of the specific questions. So when you're asking younger kids questions, this really isn't about sex specifically. When you're teaching consent to younger kids, what you're doing is you're laying foundational skills. So little kids who are 4, 5, 6, 7, these are not kids who are engaging with sexual partners, and that's not really where the conversation is going. You're talking about general consent, how to establish boundaries around their bodies, why it's important that they respect other people's boundaries, things like that. So you can ask them questions like, hey, who do you think is in charge of your body? Who do you think is in charge of my body? How do you know when a touch feels good? And a follow-up question to that could be, how do you know when a touch how does your body know when a touch feels good? And how does your mind know when your touch feels good? And so you're really getting to the basics of the idea that feeling good isn't just about feeling okay in your body. It's also about feeling okay emotionally and feeling okay mentally, things like that. You can ask them, well, how can you tell if someone likes a touch? How can you tell if someone doesn't like a touch? And here's where you can start talking to them about things that people say, but also things that people do with their bodies. So pulling away, jerking away, cringing, things like that. I had a friend a couple of days ago say to me when we were discussing this issue, well, even little kids understand that when you pull away and do this, that means I don't like that. And I think that was a really astute observation. I think the reason it's still important to talk to kids about these things and point it out and say to them, hey, you know what? You just touched your friend and they pulled away and you need to stop touching them, is to show them that we as a culture and we as adults value somebody's non-verbal communication, and that we expect our kids to respect that non-verbal communication. So it isn't so much about teaching them how non-verbal communication works, although different children have varying degrees of understanding about that. It's also just about reinforcing the lesson that you need to honor what people are telling you, both with their words and with their bodies. So for older kids, so now we're talking about tweens and certainly teens. This is when you can actually start getting into conversations about sexual consent specifically. Now, if you've been having those conversations with your children since they were little and you started off with just sort of general consent, then layering on the sexual piece becomes a little bit more organic. And it's just a natural progression from, yes, you consent around your body, who's touching you, how they're touching you is important to. And by the way, it is also important when you are touching somebody or engaging with them in a sexual way. So some questions that you might want to ask your older kid or your teen are things like, how do you know if your partner really wants to have sex? What are you going to do if you're not sure? How can you know that you yourself are comfortable having sex or doing something sexually with a partner? If you pushed someone to have sex when they weren't comfortable, how do you think that they would feel? And so again, you want to get your teens sort of thinking about these issues and talking about these issues. Thinking about things like having compassion and having empathy, and that it's not just about getting a yes, it's about getting an authentic yes. That, and that you may have a partner and they may be hesitant, or they may be saying no, or they may be like, yeah. But if that yes isn't really a like, yes, I truly want to do this, that maybe that's not okay, and that's not truly consent. And we don't want people to be having sex with us if they don't really want to be having sex with us, because sex is supposed to be pleasurable, it's supposed to be fun, it's supposed to make us feel good. And so if our partner doesn't feel good about something, then that's not really great sex. And so, oh wow, it is 9:28. So I'm pretty much at the end of this mini workshop. Again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to either type them in the Google Hangout window or email me, or you can Facebook me. And I'm going to try one more time to see if I can get my screen share working so I can tell you where to find me. Oh, screen share. You are no good. Okay, so I'm going to do this verbally. All right, so if you want to find me, I am available for workshops. I also do personal coaching with parents, which is great. So if you want to delve into any of these issues and talk about your child or teen's specific needs, that is definitely a service that I offer. So you can find me at my website, which is below here in this little panel bar. It's NadineThornhill.com. You can also email me at nadine.thornhill@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter at Nadine Thornhill, and you can also find me on Facebook at nadine.thornhill. So I want to thank everyone who joined in this chat for hanging out with me for half an hour. I hope you enjoyed this mini workshop, and I'll definitely be doing more in the future. And so for now, I am Nadine. Thanks for being here, and I hope you have a great evening. Take care. Bye-bye.